Okay, well, this is the first time I'm going to do this. We're coming up on the start of the March Madness tournament for both the men and the women, and first time I'm going to do this year. Usually I've done a men's only bracket, and just really done that one. But last year I actually for the first time filled out a women's bracket, and not to brag, but in a pool of three people, just three, I actually came away and won the thing. So I'm like, you know what? Let's go ahead and just try it out this year with the women's bracket as well. And we're going to do ladies first. We'll do the men's bracket separately here. So let's go ahead and get started here. I think we'll go ahead. We'll start with because the women do it a little different. In the men, you got East-West brackets and stuff, but the women, you have a Spokane and a Birmingham bracket, and you also have the top four seeds host the first weekend, and at least I believe just the first weekend. I'll have to remind myself here because last year and the year before, really the first 2 years, I'd kind of started watching them as in depth as I could because obviously the men's games kind of go on right about the same time, so it's kind of hard to follow both religiously and be able to see everything. Of course, it's really difficult, but. I want to go ahead. We'll go ahead and get my opinions out here. We'll start with the Spokane brackets, and then we'll do the Birmingham brackets. We'll do it that way. So the Spokane bracket 1, this is the number 1 overall seed UCLA. They're in this bracket, heading up this bracket. And the first team they have is going to be one of the 16 seeds. I believe it's University of California, San Diego, and Southern University. Both of them are 16 seeds playing in the first 4. UCLA is going to take care of business. I guess I should say, too, before we get way too far otherwise, let me just give a general lowdown of what I think. Because if you've been watching the channel here not too long, you're probably like, okay, why is he doing this? I love trying to predict stuff. I really dig doing that and stuff. And when it's not movies I'm following, it's usually a form of college sports, or sometimes professional. Some NFL I'll follow as well. Anyway, so in between seeing some movies and trying to predict all the Academy Awards and the lead up to the Academy Awards, I also hang out with some college football, college basketball, men's and women's. I'll do some college softball here in the spring, just the teams I'm passionate about at least. And then, then we'll do NFL in the fall as well. But anyhow... just as a general glance this season, the Big East, you've got UConn coming out of that, and they're far and ahead the best team out of that league. ACC is okay; they've got some really decent groups there. I would probably put them ahead of something like the Big 12. The Big 12, you've got 1 or 2 superstar teams, and then you've got some teams that'll stick around. And then you've got other teams that are, glad to be there kind of teams. And I think with the ACC, you kind of got a little bit more of the same there. But I think their top is a little heavier than the top of the Big 12, where it's like in the Big 12, okay, you've got TCU, who's really looking great right now. But outside of them, it's like, okay, West Virginia is kind of a fun watch. Just remind myself who else is in. Oklahoma is in there, and it's like, okay. Kansas State, they're decent-ish from what I've seen. And again, I haven't seen every last game this year for all these teams, but but versus in the ACC, you've got the 1-2 punch of Notre Dame and North Carolina State, both of which I think are teams that are very capable of getting to the Elite Eight or maybe even further. I'm trying to think who else here that I've seen out of the ACC. It sounds like Florida State. I haven't been able to watch them hardly at all. They've got a decent ball squad together there as well. We didn't mention Baylor. Baylor out of the Big 12. They can hang around too. They're a decent team. But I think the two big power conferences this year in women's is almost undoubtedly the Big 10 and the SEC. And again, arguably in that order, but you're really splitting hairs. But either way, I would say pretty much your top 3 seeds in each bracket is just full of so much talent, top to bottom, across all those teams. But yeah, as far as the individual breakdown, of course, you've got UCLA and USC kind of leading the way for the Big Ten. But you've got some potential surprise picks in there. I wouldn't, the way the bracket's set up, I would not be shocked to see an Iowa keep advancing the way they have the last few years, even without Caitlin Clark and a few of the other backup squad there that was always, kind of looped in with her. Let's see, Nebraska as a 10 seed out of the Big Ten. I actually wouldn't be shocked if they win at least one game. I think they can win multiple. Michigan and Michigan State are fairly solid. Illinois could do some damage potentially in the first weekend here. Maryland is not one to sleep on. Ohio State is not one to sleep on. So it's, that's good. And then you got the SEC where it's like, okay, you've got South Carolina who feels... looks, they really feel like they've been kind of slighted by getting that number 2 overall seed, not the number 1 overall seed, which went to UCLA. And when I was watching the selection show yesterday, I was genuinely a little surprised by that. I genuinely thought they were going to go South Carolina, and UCLA was going to be a close second. And it's like both of those head coaches were going to be, kind of grilling the committee there for that. I would even mention North Carolina out of the ACC too. I think they're pretty decent as well. But you've got those two. I think LSU is a really dangerous team, even if they're not fully healthy right now. If they can just get on a roll, I think there's going to be very little chance of stopping them. Ole Miss can be very dangerous. You've got Alabama as a 5 seed is one I wouldn't totally say is out of this tournament, even if they've been kind of up and down through the regular season here. Tennessee is a team that I kind of believe in a little bit. Kentucky is not one I would sleep on either. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Did I say Oklahoma was in the Big 12? They're not in the Big 12 anymore. They're in the SEC. I should have known that. It's almost a full year now. That's on me. I don't know. I think that's mostly everybody. I feel like that's mostly everybody. And then, of course, how about Texas? Another number 1 seed. Yes. Yeah, we've got Texas in there too. And Texas, I think, is a very, very strong team as well. So again, when we get to the top 3, arguably 4 seeds in each of these brackets, you're not going to have to squint to find any talent. It's all over the floor, offense and defense for all those teams. That's not to say that if you're a 5 seed or lower, like you're just happy to be there. There's definitely going to be some teams that I think 5 seed and lower that are going to be lurking. That are going to be really ready to pounce and really ready to take, a big stab at getting some upset wins and taking down some higher seeds. It's definitely going to be in the realm of possibility. I would just say right now, if you're going to be safe about it, if you want to try to get it most correct, and not be as gambly, not as risky by taking some of those smaller seeds, then you traditionally, in the women's bracket, you want to go with the 4 seed or higher, really to get into the Elite 8 and further. But that being said, let's go ahead. Yeah, let me get back into it here with the Spokane 1 bracket here. So we already picked UCLA over the 16 seed, either, again, that's going to be San Diego or Southern. The 8-9 matchup here, these are always fun ones, Richmond and Georgia Tech. I've really not been able to watch much of either of these teams, but just because they're an overall stronger conference, I'm going to pick Georgia Tech as the 9 seed to advance. Number 5, Ole Miss in this bracket versus 12 Ball State. I'll go with the SEC. I'll go Ole Miss, especially in the second half. They're a team that can really, really do some damage. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was one of the last games of theirs I watched. It was a big second half comeback. They ended up winning the game. It was as a major, like they were like 12 or 13 point underdogs or something, and they came back to win. I can't remember who it was, but it was an SEC matchup. Yeah. So yep, that's my pick there. So I have the 5 advancing there. Number 4, you got Baylor versus number 13 Grand Canyon. Just based off some of the other ESPN analysts, I know Grand Canyon is kind of one of those sleeper picks for both the men and the women's, potentially to do some damage as I think both are 13 seeds. But I got to say Baylor. Baylor is a pretty tough team in the Big 12. I think they'll be able to handle business there. Number 6, Florida State against number 11, George Mason. The 6-11 matchups are, again, another really tricky one, traditionally speaking, in both men's and women's brackets. And my first instinct actually was going to be to take George Mason, who I hadn't heard the story, but evidently was the coach has had some huge family emergency stuff all happen within the last week or so. While their conference tournament was going on, they were able to win that conference tournament as well. But then I looked at the roster and stuff. I looked at some of the stuff with Florida State, and they've got like their point guard, who's an amazing point guard. Again, you're coming out of a stronger conference in the ACC, and it's a conference that let me triple check my math here. Yes, it's a conference that does not have a number one seed. And I know right now even they, too, are feeling a little slighted by that because they thought Notre Dame still deserved a chance at getting a 1 seed. They thought maybe NC State was going to be strong enough that if they weren't going to get a 2 seed, like a 5 or 6 overall seed, they should be maybe even a little higher. So I don't know if that's enough to motivate specifically Florida State in that matchup, but I think it's enough that I'm going to pick them for at least the first round. Then you got number 3, LSU versus number 14, San Diego State. LSU is a team. You've got Mulkey, who's she's got the championship experience, winning, was it 2 or 3 years ago now? I think it was 2 years ago, the national championship as a 3 seed, coming out of a very tough SEC as well. And LSU is one of those teams, they've had, their games where they've lost this year. Texas has beat them. I believe South Carolina beat them twice, if I'm not mistaken. I'm doing a lot of this without notes or anything, so I'm just going to go off the top of my head. But yeah, this is still a team, even though, yes, there has been some concerns. The names escape me, but I know one of their major stars was someone who did not play in the SEC tournament. They still fared. It's not like they lost their first game in the tournament without the same rotation or anything with their starting 5 and everything. So I think that's enough. Even if they don't have everyone 100% healthy right now, they do have. I have to remind myself: is this a Saturday game or a Friday game? I thought it was a Friday game. Okay, this doesn't tell me. But yeah, by Friday or Saturday, I think they'll be able to do that. And depending on who they get in that second matchup, whether it's number 11 George Mason or number 6 Florida State, that gives you an extra 2 days after that, or at least a full day in between of trying to get even maybe 1 or 2 more players healthy again, if not everyone is healthy by that first game. So I do like LSU advancing in that one. Then you have number 7 Michigan State against number 10 Harvard, the Ivy League. And I know in the men's, it's a pretty common thing that the Ivy League pulls upsets or pulls near upsets in their bids. They're almost always a 15, 14, 13 seed team. Harvard, though, the fact you have 3 Ivy League teams in on the women's side, the fact that Harvard got all the way up to a 10 seed, that tells me something. And having watched Michigan State quite a few times, this is a Michigan State team that does have some talent, but man, in close games and in tougher games, they have shriveled a little bit. This is not the Michigan State team of old, I don't think. It's still a good roster. This is still a team that I think has the potential to get to the Sweet 16. I just don't know if this is necessarily the year that they're going to do it and all those stars are going to line up. I could be dead wrong about it, but I'm going to go ahead and take the lower seed here. I will take number 10 Harvard over Michigan State opening round. And then the final first round matchup here in this bracket is going to be number 2 seed NC State against 15 seed Vermont. And again, NC State's a team, man, they really did put themselves on the map here kind of later into the season with that huge win over Notre Dame to end, I believe that was the end of the regular season. If not, it was in the last week of the regular season. And still doing very well in the ACC tournament, even if they did lose to Duke. But that being said, I think NC State has this one, so they'll advance to the round of 32. All right, let's go ahead. I think this is how I did it last year too with the men's. I think I'll go ahead. Let's keep going with this bracket until we get to our the champion out of this region, and it'll be my one of my final 4 picks. In other words, so we'll keep going here. So by this try one more time. By this math, I have number 1 UCLA against number 9 Georgia Tech for the round of 32. Again, UCLA is going to be really, really wired here. Still, I think this opening weekend, in the roster they've got with Kiki Rice and Betts and everyone there, and a really good coach. I just really don't think that they're going to stumble with this with the 9 seed there, so they'll advance to the Sweet 16. Then you have number 5 Ole Miss against Baylor. I kind of want to go with Baylor here. They are the higher seed. It's going to be at Baylor. But I'll tell you what, again, I think of that Ole Miss team. They're not a team that's afraid to take some shots early and then be able to work their way back. And again, they're coming, I believe, out of a stronger conference in the SEC, I got to go the 5 seed here. I'm going to go Ole Miss, slight upset over Baylor to advance to the Sweet 16. Then you got number 6 seed Florida State against LSU. By my math, I like LSU. I like LSU in this matchup. Florida State will give them some trouble. I can see LSU's defense giving up a lot of points in that game, but managing to also drain a lot of threes with Michaela, is it Williams or again, so many names. I know her first name's Michaela. Yeah, but she's fantastic, one of the best 3-point shooters in the whole conference. So, yep, I got to go LSU to win that one and advance to the Sweet 16. And then number 10, Harvard against 2 NC State. Got to pick NC State to make to the Sweet 16. Harvard will give them a run for their money, but I like NC State. So in the Sweet 16 matchups, I have number 1 UCLA against number 5 Ole Miss. And Ole Miss, yep, they're going to do well, but I think UCLA is going to end up on top, so I have them advancing to the Elite Eight. And on the other side, LSU and number 2 NC State. I like LSU in this matchup too. I like that they're going to have those outside shooters. They've got enough tall gals that can work the post underneath. I think this is a good spot for LSU. And again, taking the stronger conference, I think you got to go LSU to advance. So I have UCLA and LSU, the 1 and 3 seeds, making it to the Elite Eight here. And in this matchup, it's close, but I like UCLA. And UCLA, sure, you do have, again, Kim Mulkey with her championship DNA and all that, but I like UCLA to beat LSU and get to the Final Four. So my champ out of the Spokane 1 bracket is UCLA, and I think that's going to be most everyone, but to heck with it. If it's who you want, there you go. So the second Spokane bracket, this is going to be USC is your top overall seed. And boy, again, they have really, really, really hit the press here in the last 24 hours or so, roughly, not being pleased with the selection committee putting them in the same bracket as UConn. But it's, and some people complained about that too. They're like, well, hold on a second. We want the best teams to make it to the Final Four, et cetera, and you don't want them to meet before you get to the Elite Eight. The problem is, when you have a lot of teams like an NC State, like a UConn, like TCU, and like Duke, they're all fantastic teams and everything, and they're just not quite good enough in the eyes of the committee, at least, to be a 1 seed. That means at some point you are going to have to run into that problem. So I think it was non-avoidable. I think regardless of how else you shifted these brackets and who put someone somewhere else, rather, you would have had to end up with some of these matchups. You would have had to see a Notre Dame and either TCU, Nebraska, one of these teams, whatever, maybe Louisville, get to a Sweet 16 matchup before you get to the Elite Eight. You would have seen that happen regardless with maybe a potential Texas and Ohio State. You could have seen that with a North Carolina and a Duke, or potentially a LSU and NC State, like I have predicted here for my Sweet 16 out of that bracket. It's like you were just going to have to hit one of those. I mean, it's like one of those, the bullets in the chamber. You can't rotate it 7 times and miss it if it's a 6-barrel chamber, if you get the reference. It's like you were going to have to, it was unavoidable. At some point, it was just going to have to land on one of these matchups. And I think that's the way it was last year as well. I know the big one everyone talked about was the national title rematch between Iowa and LSU. Fantastic game. But yeah, again, like it was last year, it's unavoidable this year. You were going to run into 1 or 2 matchups that you would have loved to have seen later on. They just had to happen in the Sweet 16. So let's go ahead, though, with the second Spokane bracket. This is the last number 1 seed, USC, lowest rated 1 seed. They go up against UNCG. I have to remind myself what those abbreviations stand for again. Either way, I'm picking USC with Juju Watkins and the rest of the crew there. You do have a fantastic USC team that has beaten UCLA twice in the regular season. So, yep, I have them advancing. And then your 8-9 matchup is the California Bears against Mississippi State. And Cal is one of those teams out of the ACC. I've just not been able to watch them. They just Whenever their games are on, I just haven't been able to watch. And Mississippi State, I don't know if I've seen them more than, flipping through, and seeing maybe a 4-minute break or whatever of them, during one of the quarters or whatever. But I don't know. Again, with these tough matchups like this, again, I kind of go with the stronger conference. In this case, it would be the SEC. So I have Mississippi State advancing the 9 over the 8 for that round. Then you have number 5, Kansas State against number 12, Fairfield. And Fairfield's been one that some people have said is a potentially dangerous team. Kansas State, I think, is a roster that, man, when they're hitting, they're hitting. They are almost unbeatable. And I think the day of, I think Kansas State is the safer bet. I will pick Kansas State to win that one. Then you have number 4, Kentucky against number 13, Liberty. I like Kentucky in that matchup. Kentucky's a pretty solid roster. Again, they're a roster that, kind of sporadically all of a sudden will be stuck in like the 50 to 60 range as far as points they can score in a game, which in the SEC, again, as they saw multiple times, was not enough to win. So I don't think they're like the strongest 4 seed out there, but I still think they'll be enough to take care of Liberty their first round. And you got number 6. Here come the Iowa Hawkeyes again with a matchup against Murray State. And this Hawkeye roster, obviously, it's not as strong as last year. You got new coach and a little bit of a different system here and everything. I still think they'll beat Murray State, so I like their matchup there against Murray State. Even though, yes, Murray State supposedly is one of the higher scoring teams to make the tournament, I think Iowa and their defense is strong enough to hold Murray State down way below their average. Or maybe, who knows, maybe it'll be just a genuine shootout and we'll have to see who wins it. Then we have number 3, Oklahoma against Florida Gulf Coast. That's FGCU. I like Oklahoma in that matchup. It'll be in Norman. You just got to, I believe Norman's where you play in Oklahoma. So yeah, it's again, a lot of stuff off the top of my head here. So yeah, I like Oklahoma in that matchup, the 3 seed advancing. Then you got number 7, Oklahoma State against number 10, South Dakota State. And South Dakota State is a team out of the Summit League that is potentially a dangerous team as well. A lot of these lower seeds, it's like last year there was really not way too much muss and fuss with the lower seeds. I think Louisville, I have to remember, were they a 4 seed or something? I think they lost their opening round. They were one of the few host teams to lose and not get out of that first weekend, as I recall, last year. I don't quite see it happening this time, though. Oklahoma State, I think, will win. And they're not a host team, by the way, Oklahoma State. They're going to be at Stores for UConn. But yeah, I think they'll have enough in it to advance. And then number 2, UConn versus number 15, Arkansas State. UConn, I'll tell you what, without spoiling way too much, I think UConn is one of those teams. They are a 2 seed. I understand why. They're coming out of a weaker conference. They have had some losses, like the loss to Tennessee in retrospect has not aged particularly well at all. But still, the fact that they went to South Carolina and beat South Carolina as handily as they did, that to me, in my opinion, as good as the rest of these teams are, that to me was enough that I'm like, I understand that it's really tough. You do genuinely have 5 teams that are worthy of a one seed and everything. This is the one I'm like, okay, when they left him out, I think this is going to spark a fire. You've got Gino, who's the probably the most experienced head coach, arguably still left on the women's side. He's got countless number of national championships, and he has a roster that I think in UConn that some people genuinely, I think, do take for granted. Let's see if I can remember here. It's Storms or what's the name of the Sarah Strong? Strong is the name of the all-star freshman that UConn has. That could be your next Paige Beckers, and Paige Beckers is still playing, and she's really lighting it up here as of late. So yeah, I think UConn is one of those rosters. Again, you've got those 2. You do have some other talented gals on that team, though. So I think that's a roster that some people have kind of underappreciated a little bit. And yes, a lot of the headlines out of the last 24 hours have been about Dawn Staley in South Carolina and their feelings, USC, their feelings about being matched up potentially with the UConn in the Elite Eight and potentially not being able to get out of their bracket again, as I believe they were a 1 seed last year as well. And I know that's taking up the headlines, but man, I do like this UConn team quite a bit. So I have them advancing past Arkansas State first round. Okay, getting into the second round here, the round of 32. In the second Spokane bracket, I've got USC against number 9 Mississippi State. I like USC here again. I think they'll advance and shoot over Mississippi State University, MSU. Then you have number 5 seed Kansas State against number 4 Kentucky. And kind of like we saw last time, I like the lower seed here as well. I like Kansas State to beat Kentucky. So give me Kansas State advancing. Then I have number 6 Iowa against number 3 Oklahoma. This is where my homerism comes in. This is where I think this could be a kind of controversial pick, but I got to go with the Hawkeyes here. I think the Hawkeyes have proven in their conference that they're still a team that even when they're down a little bit, like they were through most of the regular season, at their peak, they can beat a USC. At their peak, they can hold Ohio State to just a 1-point victory in the conference tournament. I absolutely believe this is an Iowa team that if they're playing their best basketball, they can beat number 3 Oklahoma at Oklahoma. So absolutely give me the Hawkeyes here. And then number 7 Oklahoma State versus number 2 UConn. I like UConn again here, so give me UConn handily winning that one. And then for the Sweet 16 matchups, I've got USC against Kansas State. Again, I do like USC here. It's this one could be close. This is going to be, I think, one of USC's tougher battles thus far, obviously, but I like USC to advance again. And then number 6 Iowa against number 2 UConn. I got to pick UConn still. It'd be a matchup of the ages, I think, for for some Hawkeye fans like myself. But no, I like a rematch here from last year where UConn gets revenge, because I believe it was UConn that lost to Iowa last year to make it to the national championship. So there you go. And then for the Elite 8 matchup here, the final matchup in this bracket, it's number 1 USC against number 2 UConn. And like we just talked about with history there, Iowa against UConn in the previous round. I see another rematch here with USC UConn, but this time the victor will remain the same. I like UConn, the 2 seed, advancing here, getting out of this bracket, and I think USC has a reason to be pissed and to be scared. Maybe not at the same time, but to be scared of this UConn team. I think this is a UConn team that will get out of this bracket, advance to the Final Four once again. All right, moving on to the 2 Birmingham brackets. Let's start with the first Birmingham bracket, which is going to be the South Carolina bracket. This is where they're the number 2 overall seed. Again, we talked a little bit about it. This is a South Carolina team that they have a higher number than usual in that second bracket, if you will, their wins versus loss. They have more losses this year than they've had, arguably, the last, what's it been, like 3 years or so? But don't get me wrong, the way this team really came back and showed and strutted their stuff in that SEC tournament, I wouldn't want anything to do with the South Carolina team if I'm in this bracket. I would really be on the lookout here. And the way this bracket is set up, honestly, though, they will have some challenges. This is not going to be a sleepwalk through the whole bracket to get to the Final Four for South Carolina. But let's see what I picked here. So South Carolina has to start with Tennessee Tech. I think they will advance fairly easily there. They'll get to the round of 32. Your 8-9 matchup is Utah against Indiana. And this is a Utah team. I've seen them play a couple times. They're pretty good. And it's an Indiana team. Indiana, traditionally a big power in the Big Ten. Like Michigan State this year, they're down a little bit. They've lost some games that you kind of look back and you're like, okay, they lost that game. There's still some good wins. Don't get me wrong. Good wins to this Indiana team. But this is one spot I do like the 8 over the 9. I've picked a couple 9s already, so I'm like, I'll go with the 8 seed here. I'll go with Utah to advance over Indiana. Then I have number 5, the Crimson Tide, Alabama, against number 12, Green Bay. I like Alabama here. Alabama's not been, again, a solid team in the SEC. They've gotten the win over LSU at the end against, again, a little bit of a hurt LSU roster, albeit. That was a major win. That's part of the reason I think they're a 5 seed and not like a 7 or an 8 seed potentially in this bracket. Didn't follow it up with a great performance in the SEC tournament, but as a 5 seed, I can see them advancing past Green Bay. Then number 4 is Maryland against number 13, Norfolk State, and this is at Maryland. And yeah, Maryland getting to host here, that was massive. I think that's a big thing, because Maryland, again, they're a team in the Big Ten that when they're firing on all cylinders, they're very tough to beat. from what I've seen this year. I haven't, again, watched every last game of theirs. But the fact that it's at Maryland, I really don't see them struggling here. So they'll beat Norfolk State for sure. Then I have, out of the 6-11 matchup here, you got West Virginia as the 6th seed, and you have Columbia or Washington. The Huskies will be the 11 seed here. And I don't know. I mean, again, I haven't been able to watch Columbia very much, but again, the fact that you do have 3 Ivy League teams getting in here, that tells you something. So I think it would be Columbia that wins over Washington. Washington, some decent shooters in that school, but from behind the 3-point arc and everything. But I don't know if they're an extremely cohesive group. And I've only watched them, again, parts of a game, not a full game or anything. And it's like, it's kind of strange. It's like, yep, on their home court they were decent, but on the road, as I recall, they did not have a winning record on the road, which it's always tough to win on the road in the Big Ten. But especially for them having to travel the distances that they did. I like, probably it'll be Columbia against West Virginia for the 6-11 matchup. And between the two, I think West Virginia is a team that maybe again feels a little slighted by this seeding here. I think they're a team that felt like they were maybe more deserving of like a 5 seed or potentially a 4 seed, maybe not specifically in this bracket, but in a different bracket somewhere else. And I think they'll come to play. So I have them advancing to the round of 32. Then we have number 3 North Carolina against number 14 Oregon State, and I like North Carolina here. North Carolina is a solid ball club for sure. Number 7 Vanderbilt against number 10 Oregon. This is a kind of tough matchup. Oregon, again, not a team I've watched a bunch of this year. Vanderbilt, they've got the one gal that she averaged like almost 50. It's like 53 points across 3 games or something ridiculous. Give me Vanderbilt. Give me Vanderbilt. Number 2 Duke against Lehigh is your final seeding here in the round of 64. And I like Duke to advance here. So, yep, they'll as the 2 seed advance. So, going to the round of 32, I would have it be number 1 South Carolina against number 8 Utah. And I like South Carolina here. Utah will give them a good fight, but it'll be South Carolina advancing. Number 4 Maryland against number 5 Alabama. I like Maryland here. Again, having the home court advantage for Maryland will definitely help them. Then you have number 6 West Virginia against number 3 North Carolina. Again, I like the 6 over the 3 here. I like West Virginia to advance. Nothing against North Carolina, but this is a point where I'm like, you know what? I can see, again, this West Virginia team really, again, getting on a hot streak here and advancing. And then number 7, Vanderbilt against number 2 Duke. I like Duke here beating Vanderbilt. But, again, it'll be kind of tough. Vanderbilt will give them a hard time, and I can see that one potentially being decided in the last minute and a half, depending on how many timeouts do you have left to advance the ball and try to get a good shot underneath, or a quick inbounds for a 3, et cetera, et cetera. I think it might come down to factors like that to decide this game. Then the Sweet 16 matchups. I have South Carolina against number 4 Maryland. Give me South Carolina again. I think South Carolina's, again, they're just going to be on a revenge tour this whole bracket, so good luck. Then I have number 6 West Virginia against number 2 Duke. And I like West Virginia to get this far, but Duke is going to give them a hard time. And I think Duke will advance to get to the Elite 8. So then it's number 1 South Carolina against number 2 Duke. And I like South Carolina again. Good luck to you, Duke, but South Carolina is going to be in a bad mood this whole bracket, so best of luck. And then for the second Birmingham bracket, this is Texas. Texas is the highest seed here, the last number 1 seed we'll talk about here. And again, this is a Texas team, man. When they are on fire, when they're a team that is just absolutely, again, all in and just ready to play, they're going to be tough to beat. So I think this is the 1 seed. I don't know. It's tough to say, but I think this is the toughest bracket for the number 1 seed to come out of. I'm going to argue potentially, because I think, again, when we look across here at the other Spokane bracket, USC is going to have some tough competitors potentially in a Kansas State or a Kentucky, or even earlier on if maybe they struggle with Mississippi State a little bit. it's like I can see scenarios like that happening where USC is maybe down, late in the third quarter against one or two of those teams. UCLA, I think, again, they'll have a good fight against a team like potentially a Baylor or an Ole Miss. But yeah, otherwise, like I can see South Carolina outlasting Maryland. I can see them outlasting Duke, and all that. But man, this Texas team, as great as they are, and as the fact that they got as far as they did in the SEC tournament, they were able to beat South Carolina in the second matchup in the regular season and everything. They have some real firepower they got to go up against to get to that, to get even to the Sweet 16 matchup. And then beyond that, to get to the Elite Eight. It's a road that does not get easier. And that should be without saying. But particularly, I feel like it almost doubles, you could argue, in difficulty. The difficulty setting, if you will, just keeps going up and just ratcheting up and up the further you get into this bracket. So I feel like this is arguably the toughest one for the 1 seed to get out of. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me. So your number 1 seed, Texas, first matchup is against, I have to remind myself, is this High Point and William and Mary, I think? Yes, High Point versus William Mary. Both of them are going to play in the first 4, but Texas, I think, will. That'll be obviously one of their startup games. It'll be like, yep, just go ahead and get started there. Then you have number 8 Illinois against number 9 Creighton, and Creighton is a team I've watched a couple times out of the Big East. They made it all the way to the championship for the Big East, where they got. Well, I won't say destroyed. They put up a good fight against UConn, but they ended up losing by 19, 20 points, whatever it was. And an Illinois team is your 8, and this is an Illinois team that is no pushover. I like Illinois to win this matchup. I think this is where you pick the better conference, I think, and I'll go with the 8 seed over the 9 here with Illinois. Then I have number 5 Tennessee against number 12 South Florida. I like Tennessee to advance here and beat South Florida. Number 4 Ohio State against number 13 Montana State. Give me Ohio State. Again, maybe not exactly the season that Ohio State wanted, but with 2 major powerhouses being added to the Big Ten in USC and UCLA, it was going to be hard to argue that Ohio State was still going to come out as like a potential Big Ten tournament champion or something like that. It was going to be really hard to argue that from the start of the year. But I believe they'll be happy with their 4 seed. Then we have number 6 Michigan against number 11 ISU, which is Iowa State University, or number 11 Princeton, your third Ivy League. And man, I got to say this, Michigan, like Michigan State this year, it's a team that's full of really promising players. It's a decent roster, but sometimes they just can't play well together. I've seen them fall apart multiple times. They had, I believe at USC, they had USC kind of in a spot where they kind of, they had them where they kind of wanted them, and then they just completely dried up when they got to the end of that third quarter. I remember it being a late game. It was at USC, and they just completely dried up in the fourth quarter. And again, this was, as I recall, this was without one of their best shooters, though, too. Which, again, that doesn't mean that that's, the whole comeuppance of their season. And this is a team against, I believe it was Michigan State, where they were at Michigan, their first matchup, where I believe Michigan, again, trailed through the entirety of the first half, and it looked like Michigan State was going to run away with it. And then Michigan just crushed Michigan State third quarter, if I've got my timeline remembered correctly here. Again, lots and lots and lots of games I've seen this year, and a lot of them do run together. But that being said, I do think that Michigan is going to have their hands full with this 11 seed, either Princeton or ISU. I would probably say Iowa State with Audie Crooks on the inside. She's going to be hard to guard, and she's going to draw a lot of fouls, and I don't know if that's something that Princeton's ready for. So I think Iowa State will be your 11 seed that goes up against Michigan. And if it's that particular matchup, I like this Iowa State squad to upset and advance. And I'll take the 11 over the 6 here. And particularly if it is, again, Iowa State. If it's Princeton, I still think they'll give Michigan a run for their money. And that could be also a close matchup. And it could be one, again, like we talked about with some of these other ones, might come down to who has possession last and who saved their timeouts, who's been able to save their timeouts, et cetera, et cetera. Then we have number 3, Notre Dame, which, frankly, in my opinion, this is a Notre Dame team that, yes, a month ago, maybe a little over a month ago, looked like a team that could hang with Texas. Looked like a team that could potentially beat South Carolina before South Carolina went on their revenge tour in the SEC tournament. Looked like they could really hang with either a USC or a UCLA out of the Big Ten. Looked like they could beat a UConn team. And since then, without too many major injuries that I've been made aware of, this is a team that just flopped a couple times, and really at the moments that they needed to stand tall and finish strong, they couldn't. NC State beating them late, and then not being able to get to the championship game in the ACC. So I think this is a thing where when Notre Dame was announced as a 3 seed yesterday, I was like, they know what they're doing. And again, I'm not rooting against Notre Dame at all. It's not like I particularly think they've got a terrible team or anything. Hannah Hidalgo is going to be one of the best watches in the tournament. She's going to be one of the big stars of this tournament for sure. But I think her first name's Hannah. But yeah, Hidalgo out of that team, yes, she's going to be a fun watch. And you won't be able to take your eyes off her through the whole game. She'll light up that scoreboard. But I think the 3 seed's appropriate, and I think anything higher would have been a little bit of it would have been a little troubling for me to get over. I'll just say that. But I think they were seeded appropriately here as a 3 seed. But they have Stephen F. Austin as their first round matchup. I think Notre Dame will take care of business. Then you have number 7 Louisville against number 10 Nebraska. I've seen more Nebraska this year than I have of Louisville, and I think I got to go with the better overall conference, which is the Big Ten. I like Nebraska to advance against Louisville. And then, speaking of Louisville, you got a former Louisville star in Haley Van Lith, who is now leading her and Sedona Prince out of leading TCU to almost inarguably their best season of all time. And they have number 15 Farley Dickinson University for their first matchup. I like TCU to advance easily over them to make it to the round of 32. So, next round here in this bracket, you've got number 1 Texas against number 8 Illinois. I like Texas to advance, but again, Illinois is not going to be a team that's going to... I really don't think that Illinois, now, for you gamblers out there, if it happens this way, and whether it's Illinois or Creighton, it really won't matter too much. Maybe a point or two would be the difference in the spread. But if that spread for Texas versus Illinois, if it's more than 14 points, you definitely got to pick Illinois to cover, in my opinion. I would say absolutely take that big cover. If it's Texas only favored by like 11, 12 points, then yeah, Texas probably does cover that. But I think this is an Illinois team that'll hang. Again, they're coming out of a more battle-hardened conference than it might appear on the surface. This is an Illinois team that has some major wins this year, so I would absolutely not fall asleep on this matchup and say, oh, Texas will just sleepwalk through it. They will not. They'll have to play well against Illinois. Then you have number 5 Tennessee against number 4 Ohio State, and this is one of the tougher matchups. But again, like I've done a few times here, I think I got to go with the lower seed here. I got to go Tennessee, who again, when you look, and I know it's not obviously it's not the all-encompassing win of the year, but the fact that they handled UConn the way they did, I think that was a moment where it's like, okay, that shows that when they're at their highest, when they're at their peak, this is a Tennessee team that is going to give you hell for 40 minutes. So I absolutely believe Tennessee will advance here. Ohio State, again, it's going to be a great matchup, but I like Tennessee to advance. Then for your next your next matchup here in the round of 32, it's going to be either Princeton or Iowa State against Notre Dame. And I think Notre Dame, with the energy they have based off of the lower seeding than they were expecting and everything, and coming into a really tough bracket as a 3 seed. I mean, I would argue them or maybe Oklahoma for the 3 seeds this year. Those are your really, really tough ones. North Carolina's got some good matchups as well, I guess, but... This is not a bracket you want to be a part of, I think. Where you say, oh, we can get to a Sweet 16 or an Elite 8, without way too much trouble. This is not the bracket to say that in. But yeah, I'd like Notre Dame to advance here. Over some good teams there, be it either Michigan or ISU or Princeton. And then we have Nebraska against TCU for the last matchup here. I like TCU to advance again. I think this is, again, TCU is a team I've really rarely seen them like struggle this year. They've almost always won convincingly in all their matchups. And again, it's not the strongest Big 12 of all time, but it's still not a conference that, again, you look at and you say, oh, it's just really one or two teams. No. It's pretty good. So we'll move on now to the Sweet 16 matchups. And here I have Texas against Tennessee. Again, this is a barn burner game. This is one of those Sweet 16 matchups that are like may have the intensity of an Elite Eight or even a Final Four matchup. And Texas, I think, will scrape by. I think they'll scrape by. They'll get by Tennessee with just enough in the tank to get past them. But Tennessee is going to be real tough. And then number 3, Notre Dame against number 2, TCU. I still like TCU in this matchup. I think Notre Dame has shown that, when they get a little further in, that they have the potential to fall short a little bit. So I like TCU to advance here. And in the Elite Eight matchup, I like number 1 Texas against TCU here being the two it comes down to. And again, I don't know. I think this Texas team, as good as they are and as great as they're shooting and everything, I like TCU to beat them. And I like TCU to pull the upset here and get the win. And you've got Booker, I think, was the great player for Texas. And she's also going to be really fun to watch in this tournament. But when you have the 1-2 punch of Sedona Prince and Haley Van Lith and everyone else on the TCU squad backing them up, I just that's going to be a really, really tough matchup for anyone in this bracket, be it Tennessee or Texas, potentially Ohio State if they go on a miracle run, maybe not miracle run, I'm sorry, if they go on a good run, or really good run. Because I don't think it's going to take a miracle for them to get past either Tennessee or Texas. If they play to their best of their abilities and stuff, they can hang with those two teams. And again, if just enough circumstances go right, they get just enough foul calls against the other team, et cetera, then there's totally a way that Ohio State advances there. But anyways, So a brief recap: my final 4, your champions out of each bracket. From the first Spokane bracket, I've got UCLA. From your second Spokane bracket, I've got UConn. From your first Birmingham bracket, I've got South Carolina. And from the second Birmingham bracket, I've got TCU. So I've got 2 1s and 2 2s advancing to the Final Four. And in the first Final Four matchup, we'll start with UCLA versus UConn. This, I think, is where experience outlasts. And this is where I like UConn to advance to another national title championship bout. And UCLA, they're tough. I mean, obviously they're a team that when everyone else was kind of doubting them in the third matchup against USC, they came back and they won. Maybe not convincingly, maybe not by 15, 20 points or anything like that, but they won. And they won by more. It was like it ended up being a 3-possession game or whatever it was, 7 or 8 points. Or again, just off the top of my head, that's what I recall. And it's funny, I did like UCLA in that game, as I recall, on the betting markets at least. I said I would have, definitely would have put your money on UCLA to cut. I think they were a 4-point underdog against USC at that game. So I was like, and it's tough to play the same team 3 times. And I do not, I also don't not recognize the possibility that if it is USC that advances out of this bracket, though, that this is going to be the 4th time that these two teams play. And that's going to be really tough. But I like the coaching advantage, I think, also goes to UConn here. And that's a factor that sometimes we don't always 100% weigh in. But I think that I will weigh in on that one and say coaching experience goes to Gino. I think he makes it to the national championship game. And then you have South Carolina TCU being my matchup on the other side here. And again, with the experience and everything, you've got the experience of the head coach with Don Staley. And you have the experience, though, of the players, almost inarguably, with 2, kind of late players with Prince and Haley Van Lith. But I think between those 2 factors, again, I got to go coach here. And I think, again, TCU is going to be on a run where it's like, we're just really excited that this is the furthest our team is. If all of my picks are correct, which obviously I don't know if they are going to be or not, I would like for a lot of them to be correct. But, if I happen to be correct on this, this would mean TCU does advance to their first Final Four ever. But again, I don't have the math on that off the top of my head. But it would be like, we're just happy that we keep advancing and we keep playing as well as we have. South Carolina, though, if they happen to lose this game to a TCU or a Texas or to anyone else that makes it out of that bracket, That's not going to be a good thing for them. They're going to be really disappointed in that result. And I still think South Carolina is on the revenge tour when we get to this game in the Final Four, and they also advance to the national championships. It'll be UConn versus South Carolina. And again, between these two, when we look at experience and everything, you got a more experienced coach, arguably in Gino, and you got a more experienced roster, even with some freshmen on the UConn team. Paige Beckers, man, and I think she's kind of, even though, yes, she has had her share of injuries through the years, what was it, ACL tear or something, I think what would have been her sophomore or junior year, whatever it ended up being, kept her out, I think, majority of that season. I think she is your next premier player. She is the next Caitlin Clark, if you will, that, will advance, be the number one overall pick for the WNBA and everything. And unlike Caitlin, though, I think she is going to have enough in her to get a national championship. So my final pick is UConn to win the whole thing. I know it's, in the years past you would have said, oh, no, yeah, no shit. But it's like, I know, yeah, it's also like, well, it's not like, in the particular matchups I have, it's like, yeah, it would have been more exciting, I think, for a UCLA-TCU matchup potentially. Because then it's like, okay, well, neither one of those teams has won a national championship in a long time, if not ever, for TCU. And again, I don't know the math off the top of my head. I don't know if UCLA, maybe I would imagine they've won at least one or two. I know on the men's side, they've won a good number of championships. Maybe not in recent years, but going back years and years and years ago, they did. But anyhow, yeah, so I know it's two teams that have won a bunch of championships, particularly in the last 10, 15 years. But again, I think these are the two best teams in the tournament this year. I think they're the more well-rounded teams. And I think they're the teams that also have, particularly with South Carolina, the drive to keep going. That's the big thing that some people sometimes consider and sometimes don't consider and sometimes, end up paying for. It's like you need a team that's also driven a little bit. I look at, some of the teams last year, like on the men's side, it's like North Carolina State last year was driven. They played 5 games in 5 days to be the 11th seed and get that automatic bid by winning the ACC tournament last year. They were driven, and they kept going. They kept that drive going all the way to a Final Four matchup that, as I recall, they were, they still played very well in. So it's like, yeah, when I look at that scenario again, I look at that, it's like, well, I don't know if there's particularly a team like that this year in the women's where it's like you had a surprise kind of upset bid to take their conference tournament or anything of the major 5 conferences. But South Carolina, though, arguably is your closest to that. UConn, we knew they were going to win the Big East. We knew it was either UCLA or USC for the Big Ten. We knew TCU had a really good chance of winning the Big 12. It was really, am I forgetting one? Sorry. Oh, ACC, yeah. We knew with the ACC was a little more up in the air. We thought NC State had a good shot, Duke had a good shot, Notre Dame had a good shot. That one's a little more up in the air. South Carolina and the SEC felt a little more up in the air because this was a South Carolina squad that, yes, had more losses in their column than they would have liked. Yes, it's a Texas team that has beaten them. Yes, it's an LSU team that can hang. Yes, you have Texas, or I think if I didn't already mention, yeah, Texas, they're in there. And who's the other one I wanted to bring up? LSU, yeah, I'm missing a major contender out of the SEC. I don't know how. Oh, geez, who am I missing here? It's not NC State, it's not Duke. Who was it that was getting pretty far in that tournament? Damn, now I can't remember. That wasn't Ole Miss. Who was it that was advancing pretty far? Oh, well, that's okay. Maybe Oklahoma. Oklahoma's one, kind of a wild card to throw in there for the SEC. And yeah, maybe I'm wrong with my pick with them going out a little earlier than they would really like. So yeah, it's not going to be a super easy year for picking, I don't think, on either the men's or the women's. But there's my picks, at least for the women's. It's going to be a fun tournament. I think, as we've seen with the transfer portal and everything on the men's side and the women's side, particularly more of the women's side, though, with not having that one and done culture and everything, it has allowed a lot of these players to stick around and get more of a following, get higher NIL totals and everything. Of course, Cooper Flagg and some of the others on the men's side will beg to differ, but yeah, I think it's shown that, yeah, you can have some genuine superstar and household names of the sport that come from this side. So there you go. All right, I'll be back here in a little bit, and we'll do the men's bracket. Talk about those.